Well, welcome again today. We have had a week in between. We just love these chapters, and it's hard to take a week off in between, but the clock does that to us. But we're back, and we pray that you will get a Bible out and enjoy being in Revelation 6 with us. We're not going to discuss any other topics. We're not going to do a long introduction. We're just going to go to the text so that we get as much time as we can. We're first of all going to wrestle with the white horse of Revelation 6. So get a Bible. We are GPS, God's Prophetic Surprise, Dr. Paulien, Sara Colon. I'm Pastor Dan from Garden Grove Church. And we're ready. Are you ready, John?
Ready.
He ended the last show by saying that I was going to be proven wrong, which I am willing to be proven wrong. I've certainly had been proven wrong before. But we will sit here and learn. So get a Bible out. We'll read it again one more time. Revelation chapter 6, verse 2. And here in the NIV, it says, I looked, and there before me was a white horse. Its rider held the bow, and he was given a crown, and he rode out as a conqueror, bent on conquest. So as he told us last week, there were three views. One about the local century, the Parthians coming in from the east. But the two most familiar interpretations have been that this is Christ, parallel to Revelation 19, coming on the white horse with the army dressed in white, coming down from heaven. You've all seen paintings. And that would refer to the first century as the gospel went all over the world in purity. The other view, which I sort of lean towards, has been that these four horsemen are one and the same.
Actually, you're pretty opinionated about it, you know.
Yeah, well, but it's for fun. But I am willing to be the other way. And when I teach it, I teach both of them. Here are these two views. So there are the four horsemen, and that they're all evil, all war, death, famine, and so on. And that this is the counterpart to Christ, an antichrist, not Christ himself. So we talked about it, and we're set up now to hear the truth.
Well, before we start with that, let me just ask you a question. You stated that in your view, the four horses are all evil. Okay, so the question I have, are they all evil as a group, or are there distinctions among these horses that are significant in your view? I mean, you just see that, well, this is just evil, let's move on. Or do you see the white horse and the red horse and the black horse as being evil in some different form, and what would that take?
Well, I think the traditional death, conquest, death, war, famine, pestilence, those four, I think, they're different forms of evil, and collectively they would be the four winds, the angels holding back the four winds of evil. They represent the evil personified.
So the white horse represents military conquest.
Yes.
And then the red horse represents
war.
War. Mm-hmm. Sounds a little redundant to me, but moving on.
Yes.
Then the black horse represents famine.
Famine.
And the pale horse represents disease and destruction and death. Yeah. Okay. Now for me, the thing kind of unravels right there from the start, because conquest and war are really the same thing. So the white horse and the red horse are both essentially the same. So that to me is a challenge. When it comes to wrestling with difficult texts are often difficult because the obvious theological perspective on a text doesn't always work when you do the exegesis. And that's the problem I have here. When you think of Romans 7, you have this person in Romans 7, who wants to do good, and he can't quite do it. And he's going back and forth. I mean, that sounds like the life that many of us live. We struggle trying to do the right thing. And sometimes we start out the day with good intentions and everything unravels, So we see the man of Romans 7, we say, yeah, I resonate with that. That must be a Christian. So who's got the gospel on the one side, but doesn't always perform the way they would like. When you get down and do the exegesis, though, that position unravels. And so this is what I think is happening here. I find appealing what you said about them and about this evil side, etc. But I think when you actually do the exegesis, it doesn't hold up. So let me let me share why some of that would be, and then we'll ask Sara if we should care this deeply at all.
Bring the black robe and the gavel next week.
Yeah. All right, well, it says, behold, a white horse, and he who sat on it had a bow, and a crown was given to him. He went out conquering and to conquer. So there's that conquest thing, all right? Well, it starts out with the white. It's a white horse. I think the black horse, the red horse, the pale horse, doing a bunch of damage, that makes sense, that those are negatives, that those are kind of evil. But white in the book of Revelation is never evil. It's never counterfeit. It's always positive. You have the white robes that the redeemed are given. The white robes represent the righteousness of the saints and so on. So if this white horse is evil, it's the only place where white is associated with evil. So that I think needs some explanation.
It's an argument on the other side, yes.
And there is such a thing as deception. Book of Revelation's full of deception. But wherever deception appears, it's obvious who you're dealing with. For example, in chapter 13, you have this dragon and this beast out of the sea and the beast from the earth. I mean, these are clearly bad guys. The dragon is not the good guy. That's been clearly spelled out before that. The dragon's not the good guy. So when the dragon starts talking like Jesus, or when the beast from the sea starts acting like Jesus, you realize this is some kind of elaborate, deceptive scheme. And the question is, where's the evil in this white horse? The only thing I think you can come up with is the association with the other three, who we would agree are evil. So that's the first one. How am I doing, Sara?
Good. I was actually going to ask if the colors of the horses are significant, because obviously I haven't seen many bright red horses roaming freely, so I figure that there's something to that. But then my question was like, so what's a pale horse in comparison to the white horse? So if your argument is that white is pure, but the other three are evil, then what's pale? Is that the deception or the like counterfeit kind of mentality, or what? Anyways, so art major, I thought of colors.
Yeah. Well, I think part of the exegesis would be to suspect that these colors do matter, and that each of them has a character that is somewhat different from the others. And when you go to the fourth, he broke the fourth seal. He says, I saw, this translation says an ashen horse. Yeah. That's kind of interesting, that kind of a gray mask that people get when they're dying. Creepy, yeah. The ashen horse, he who sat on it had the name Death. Is that good or evil? I think death is not good. Hades was following him. Whoa, And authority was given him over a fourth of the earth to kill with the sword, with famine, with pestilence, and by the wild beasts of the earth. So I think
that's pretty clear.
Pretty clear that we're dealing with evil there. And I think, when you read the three horses, the red, the black, and the colors represent evil in different perspectives. The question is, if white were evil, what is it representing? And so I think you're without exception, elsewhere in the book of Revelation, at least a dozen times, white is associated with Christ or with his people. And of course, then you have the analogy, there is one other white horse in Revelation, and that's the one in chapter 19. Is that one evil? Is there anything about that one that's evil? No, he's faithful and true and all those things that make it clear that the white horse is the good guy. He's destroying the beast from the earth and the beast from the sea, which were the bad guys all along. So the connection with 19 would seem to suggest that the white horse is to be taken as Jesus Christ or his agent.
So then my question is, and I am not the questioner, but when it says conquering and to conquer, are there places in Scripture that it's not negative to be conquering and conquer?
I agree with that question.
Because then, I mean, you're saying they're different than war, or they're similar if you look at it from his perspective. But like, how does that play into it? Because...
Okay. Well,
When I watch the medieval movies, the leader is always on a white horse, crying out and leading the army into battle, whether good or bad. So I feel
lopping heads off and other
I'm just
glorious
saying,
things.
I don't know.
Yeah.
White's not that significant in those movies.
That is a great question, and I would suggest we just go back to earlier chapters.
Okay.
In chapter 2, verse 7, it says, "To him who overcomes, I will grant to eat the tree of life, which is in the paradise of God." Now, is that a description of evil? Now, the challenge here is that in the English, my English says conquering and to conquer in chapter 6, verse 2. The problem is it's the same word as chapter 2, verse 7. The one who conquers will get to eat from the tree of life that is in the paradise of God. Chapter 2, verse 11, he who overcomes, he who conquers will not be hurt by the second death. Who is not hurt by the second death? The good guys or the bad guys? In the story of Revelation. See, those who are not hurt by the second death are the redeemed.
So there is evidence of the Greek word being used in positive ways.
The Greek word for conquest and the Greek word for overcome are the same word.
And what about this thing? In NIV, it uses bent on conquest. Where does that bent come from?
I'll come back to that.
Because that doesn't sound positive.
Yeah.
You know, we wouldn't say, Jon Paulien was bent on conquest. We would probably not take that
It's
positively.
probably true today, but generally it would not be good.
Yeah, that's my point. I don't know if it's a good translation or not.
Yeah, I would say that's the person who made that translation is assuming the white horse is evil.
Is evil.
But we'll take a look at that Greek in just a bit. But I wanted to, 7 times.
To overcome.
These overcomers, it's the same
positive.
word. But look at 3:21, where it doubles down. In 3:21, he who overcomes, I will grant to him to sit with me on my throne as I also overcame and sat down with my Father on his throne. Jesus overcame. And we've studied that text earlier, and we saw that would be the cross and everything surrounding it, the cross, the resurrection, etc. Double down again in chapter 5, verse 5. He says, one of the elders said to me, stop weeping. Behold, the lion that is from the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has overcome.
Triumphed here.
Triumph. Yeah, see, here the translation's a little closer to 6:2, but it's the same word.
Mine all say conquered.
Yeah, so is 6:2 also?
6:2
He goes
says,
forth
and I looked
conquering.
and behold, yeah,
Conquering in order they might conquer. What's that translation?
ESV.
That's a pretty good one. Yeah,
I like ESV,
I do like
so.
the ESV, yeah.
So.
I didn't bring it today because I have trouble reading it in this light. I think some of our viewers understand what I'm saying. Anyway, yeah, I find the good old hard text I can read a little bit easier.
Okay, so everyone's
Studio
following along with us. We've now looked at a number of parallels where the word conquest is not negative but positive.
It's been at least 9 times in the book, never negative.
So 11 or 12 times the word white is positive, not negative, and a number of times the word for conquering, overcome, triumph is positive rather than negative.
Right.
Okay.
And if you go to 6:2, to follow up on your earlier question, Dan, what is this bent on conquest kind of a thing? In this translation, New American Standard says, he went out conquering and to conquer.
Which verse?
Verse 2 of chapter 6.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So in the first seal itself, there's a double. Again, it doubles down, just like 3:21. You have a double mention of the word. He goes out conquering and to conquer, it says here. In the Greek, it's a purpose clause. He goes out conquering, that's a participle, I believe. I should perhaps look this up. Do I have it here somewhere? Anyway, sorry, folks. But when you look at the original, I believe it's a present participle, which is extremely continuous. So,
Well, that's what I was going to say. It's kind of like he's doing something in the present, but he's also going to be doing something in the future of similar.
yeah, he went out conquering, that's a present participle, which is generally the most continuous expression in the Greek, except for one other. And in order that he might conquer, that's a subjunctive, in order that he might conquer, that's even, this combination is the most continuous expression you can get in the Greek language. So what it's saying here, his mission is conquest. His mission is overcoming. His mission is victory. And he will keep on going until there's nothing left to be conquered. So it seems to me
That's kind of scary.
that fits, well, except if you think of it in gospel terms.
Yeah.
It's been gospel up until now. All 9 times it's been a reference to Christ, the cross, and the believer's experience and the good things that happen when believers are faithful. So if this conquest is about faithfulness and about the gospel, then he's simply saying the gospel will go forth until everybody that can possibly be reached has been reached.
Right.
So he's not going to quit on anyone. See, there's a good gospel message. This white horse is not quitting on anyone. He's going to keep on going until it all comes together.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Just, I'm glad to be persuaded. Let me wrestle with this. I was taught somewhere along the line that the first circle of interpretation is to deal with the passage itself. And then we go to looking at the 9 and the 11 and other references. But here the 4 are together. In chapter 7, the 7 are together. And in the Old Testament passages, they are together. Do we have a good enough justification from the other text to come into a passage and say, we're going to carve one out? Or does the priority of integrity of a passage say, if most of it is like this, it's probably all like this, and that would be the default. You have to have a reason to leave that interpretation. How would you answer that?
That is why we have what we call a problem text here. That's why there is disagreement on the text.
Because of those 2 principles.
Well, because when the exegesis doesn't fit the obvious theological perspective, which I'm granting, you have a very intriguing and attractive argument about these 4 horses. The question is, does it fit with the compelling exegesis of the text? That's the question. And if it does not fit, then you have to ask, how is this going to be different? What does that tension tell us? And what is happening here? So that's the key. If there's nothing about this text that suggests it ought to be evil here, then if it is good, how do you figure the 3 bad horses? How do they relate to the gospel then? So it changes the questions, the theological questions you ask of the text. And then you may discover that what looked obvious theologically wasn't really so. And that's what I think will be the outcome here.
Okay.
But let's go a little further, because it's not just those 2. Again, if the horses are evil, what it's saying here is that they will never end their conquest. Does that mean Satan's going to win in the end? It seems to me that's only appropriate to Christ, the winning side, according to the book of Revelation. If there's a conquest that cannot be stopped, would Revelation ever use that language for Satan?
But you have chapter 5 where Christ is triumphing.
Right.
And so we don't have to have Christ triumphing here. We have Christ triumphing here in Revelation 19.
Right. But the triumph here is different than that in 5. It is so totally continuous, it means this guy's winning in the end. And that, to me, is a real serious theological problem.
So the present participle, you think he will keep winning, and we will always win.
Beyond that, the purpose clause with the subjunctive.
So we're happy if that's present participle continuous with Christ. We're not so happy if that's Satan.
Exactly, because when you're talking about continuously conquesting with no end in sight, that means this guy wins all the way down to the end of time.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is a almost overpowering issue here. Now, Sigve Tonstad, who is with us, and I wish he were here because we would really have a good go at this. He is very strongly persuaded, I think, of the view that you have given, and I always take him seriously because you have to take him seriously. He's really done careful work with whatever he has done. But I still come back to the challenge, and I find on this point that he sees the theological point and has a hard time seeing the exegetical point. And I find it natural for me to do that too. And there's places in which he sees the exegetical point before I do, and that's okay. But I think on this one, when you've done the exegesis, it's pretty hard to stick with that theology. I agree with his theology, but not in applying it to the white horse.
So then how does this, so if this horse is good, how does that affect things? And if this horse is bad, how does that actually affect things in the big picture?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's why I was asking Dan about the bad ones. He didn't seem to have an answer, so
I feel like there's a lot of guessing going on in this one verse, right? So like, we have theories, but then does it actually affect anything in the long run, or is it like something we're just going to bicker about and then move on, you know?
Well, I think a thematic aspect of it, a theological aspect of it, I would say is the book right at the beginning says this is the revelation of Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. And if he is not present in chapter 6 anywhere except at the very end, when it's the wrath of the Lamb, if he's not present in these 4 horses, are we missing something important?
Interesting.
And so I would say, yes, it matters quite a bit, because that means that the 7 seals are teaching the gospel. They're not some other theology or from some other place than the same gospel that's at the heart of the Gospels and Paul and John and so on. But let me finish. There's a couple more arguments here. It says that a crown was given to him, and that crown is a Stephanos crown. It's kind of like the Olympic gold medal. Mm-hmm. It's not the royal crown that a king wears, a sign of authority. It's the crown of victory. It's the medallion. It says, you know, you won this thing. You won the race. You won the battle, whatever. Victors coming back from battle would sometimes get the same laurel wreath as the Olympians, and the two are related. So this is the general's crown. And everywhere in Revelation except one, everywhere but one, this is always applied to Christ, to his people, to the things of the gospel. The one place where it's not, but again, that's still in the future, in the 5th trumpet. The locusts in the 5th trumpet have crowns of gold, and those crowns are Stephanos crowns. So you have one outlier, and with conquest, you have 1 or 2 outliers later in the book. The problem is the reader approaches this, and without saying, okay, well, this is conquest, but it's a different kind than before. Or, this is the Stephanos crown, but it's different than the ones before. The 24 elders have Stephanos crowns. In the 7 churches, believers are receiving these Stephanos crowns as a sign that they've overcome. So you're taking an image that's been consistent throughout the book, and suddenly in chapter 6 it's going to mean the opposite of what it meant before. Whereas in chapter 9 and 13 it tells us these are the bad guys. They are imitating. That's where the deception is. They are taking on the Stephanos crown. They are taking on the white garments, etc. So not the white garments, but the word conquest. The beast conquers, you see. So the language here can be used for deception, but when it is, it's clearly so. It spells it out. Matthew 24, Dan, you were talking to me about that.
Yes.
The problem is this. There is a parallel between chapter 6 and Matthew 24. But if the white horse is not the gospel, then that's part of the gospel is clearly there in Matthew 24. This gospel will be preached to the whole world as a witness to all nations, and then the end will come. If that's not the white horse, where is it? So if there is a parallel with Matthew 24, I think it actually supports that the white horse represents Jesus in the Gospels, because that's the missing theological piece in chapter 6.
It doesn't refer to conquering specifically. It has wars and rumors of wars and nation rising up against nation.
Right.
That would be parallel to the red horse, is what you're saying.
Right. Well, in Matthew 24, you have everything in chapter 6 in Matthew 24 except the gospel.
Interesting.
And that's why I think the white horse needs to be the gospel as just part of the New Testament way of looking things. Final point, there are others one could make, but the final point is this. This horse causes no destruction. He goes out conquering. Now, if you assume that conquering is destruction, then fine, it's good. But that's an assumption. We've seen that that word really has a different meaning than military conquest. So this white horse does not do any damage. The other three do a whole lot of damage. And so that's also a contrast between them. So I would suggest that the white horse represents the gospel going to the world, and the three horses are reactions to the gospel. People resisted in different ways and at different levels.
So what about the bow? Is there significance in the bow? Is it like the elves from Lord of the Rings? They're good people. They're like pointed in their targets, but they don't do mass destruction? Or like...
Yeah. Well, in the Old Testament, that one's more ambiguous.
Okay.
So I'll be very straight about that. The bow has been used by some to say, well, it's Gog has the bow. You know, and so this is the enemy of God's people, therefore this must be the enemy of God's people, except that God also has a bow in a number of other places, and when it comes to God, God ends up smashing that bow and showing that he's got a bigger bow. So,
all right, well.
So I think, yeah, I would say the bow, I didn't mention it because it wasn't an argument.
It doesn't help.
It's ambiguous.
Okay.
It doesn't determine it.
It doesn't determine it either way. It's used by both sides, and I try to avoid evidence that doesn't really help us settle the thing. Let me share with you a text that I think is alluded to.
You've got
here.
about a minute, John.
Psalm 45, yeah, verses 3 through 5. Psalm 45, verses 3 through 5. If there is an Old Testament parallel to the white horse, this would be it. And I just want you to see how that plays here. Psalm 45, verses 3 through 5. Gird thy sword on thy thigh, O mighty one. In thy splendor and thy majesty, and in thy majesty ride on victoriously. For the cause of truth and meekness and righteousness, let thy right hand teach thee awesome things. The arrows are sharp, the people fall under thee. Thine arrows are in the heart of the king's enemies. This is a description probably of Solomon, the wedding of Solomon. And he is dressed up like a general. He's got his sword at his side. He's got his bow in his hand. And he's going to go out and conquer all the nations that were left over from David's conquest. And Solomon is the son of David, which I think knowledgeable readers of Revelation would have recognized. Cool. So Dan, I'll rest my case on that. And I recognize these are tough passages. But when I went at this with an open mind and just went word by word, I came to the overwhelming conclusion that this had to be positive.
There it is. You've heard the two views, and there's arguments, and the commentaries that I have in my library are split among the two. And you've heard a scholar do the research, and those are powerful arguments. And don't we want that to be true? Don't we want that to be that Christ goes out as a conquering horse and to win, and we're part of that, and we're part of the white horse on the army. Anyway, we hope you enjoyed our study. We hope you'll come back again next week. God bless you.